I don't know who's trying to get in. You know what I did do the other day, though? Are you there? The other day,
Yes, I
was going through my permissions, and I saw that. Hold on. I guess we're in.
Yeah, I see that. It says meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Hi,
YouTube. So we're live on YouTube. Hi, Steve Patterson here. Wind and Raven. We've had an epic trying to get to. I need to close this and get back over here. This is a total mess. All right, are you there?
I'm here.
Hello, everybody. That didn't go well. So we were. If we did, that's welcome to your day, and you're welcome. So Steve Patterson here, Wind and Raven. Today we're talking shadow work. We're talking about the subconscious part of consciousness in the ever-expanding study of understanding consciousness that I'm endeavoring here to undertake. So today I've got Carrie Slayton on with me, and Carrie and I have known each other for quite a while. We've done a lot of work together. We've even done some very particular esoteric kind of work. We dabbled in our own version of Nordic shamanism referred to as Seither. We'll maybe talk about that in another day. Maybe she'll touch on it today. But really, over the years, Carrie's been somebody that has worked with people with their various things, subconscious, shadow, things like that, and has called it shadow work. So how you doing today, Carrie?
I'm doing well, thank you.
How's like our beginning here? Wasn't that great?
It was great. I think it's interesting that Facebook refuses to connect with its shadow.
That's right. It looked where you're coming from. It's like, that's just too much. I like your background, by the way.
Thank you very much.
So where are you right now?
I am one with the universe.
How appropriate. So tell us a little bit. I mean, obviously, shadow enters into the popularized notion of it with Carl Jung and all of his shadow work, which is basically establishing the conscious and the unconscious, and then a collective consciousness, subconscious, I should say, the conscious, the subconscious, and the collective consciousness. But beyond that, that's psychotherapy. It's gone a million different directions in other ways, and that's where you're out there someplace. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, I am a coach, and so what I do for most of my work is I'm helping people with a whole variety of I don't know, behavior, you want to call it behavioral missteps, or I want to get to the next level, or coaches, are great in partnering with people to get to where they want to go next. Sometimes where they want to go next is to get out of a place of stuckness. Sometimes they want to go to the next best thing, which is, their next job, or, whatever. It's a variety of things. But a lot of times what I have found in coaching is that it always boils down to a repertoire of behavior patterns that people are unaware of. It's in their subconscious, their psyche, and it's getting in their way. And the lack of awareness around it is problematic, often shows up, manifests in ways that they're not completely aware of. And a coach is in a unique position to be able to see these things. And so creating awareness around those things, depending on whether people are ready to receive them or not, and some people are, say, oh, well, that's not my thing, and I don't want to talk about that. And it's, coach moves on. We don't have to do shadow work, but a lot of what's happening in my connection with people, even my friends and family members now will call me because they know I will share perspectives with them in a way that doesn't feel offensive, and asking provocative questions. So yeah, and I actually like to gently reveal the shadow to people, because oftentimes if you can do this in a very soft and in a way where people can be receptive to it, it's their first step into understanding how to liberate themselves. And liberation feels so good, right? And that first step towards liberation is often what creates repeat customers. And not just customers, but
That's
family members and people who want to come back to it and say,
right.
give me
But
more.
right. And when you say repeat customers, it's because of repeated patterns. And if we keep walking around the same building and knocking into the same thing every time, we can't really blame the thing every time. Eventually we have to learn and do something or move it out of the way. And of course, when it comes to the subconscious, one of the most popular uh, problems, I guess you could say, is the victim mentality, because it's so easy. But not really, I want to go into that. But when it comes to shadow work, if a person is coming into this, maybe they're new to these kinds of things. What about them if they hear shadow work, how would they consider that in their life? What would be this sort of step into being open to it? Sort of, not deepening, but just getting close, see if you want to touch that or not. What would be the thing that a person would have rise in them that they might say, maybe I need to see somebody with shadow work?
Hmm. A lot of people aren't going to come to that unless they've actually been exposed to the concept of it. So let's go there first.
Go there first.
Yeah, what is the shadow? How was it described, right? By Jung. Jung described it as parts of ourself that we have rejected due to social conditioning that happens in our formative years with the family. The family is teaching us how to be conditioned for societal introduction, right? And so all of our misbehaviors are brought out as children, and we shove those into. Robert Bly wrote a little book on the human shadow, and he describes it as long black bag that we carry behind us. And so as we come across these behaviors and things that the family is telling us we need to put in our bag, we're shoving these things. Self-rejecting is really what it is. It's rejection of parts of ourself, and we become fragmented. And then when we get into high school and our adolescence, then we're with our peer group and they're telling us more things that we need to reject about ourselves. I mean, anyone who remembers their adolescence remembers there's some trauma there. I mean, we all went through, periods of identification crises and, friends don't like this, or, just high school was a mess. And then we get into our early 20s, right? And we are culturally conditioned because we go to work and now work and being an adult and, business, government, all of that. There's lots of cultural conditioning that happens. And so all of these things that are teaching us to reject certain parts of ourselves in order to be socially accepted. And we conform to that because as children, we have an innate need to survive. And our caregivers are the providers of our survival. So we do that for a sense of belongingness or for a sense of survival. We do it with our peers for a sense of belongingness. And we do it as an adult to achieve a sense of participation. We're now part of a group, tribalism, if you will.
Right. And I guess along the way, where it would become shadow or in the light of your conscious thoughts, would be how those little steps are taken. Like when we talk about the socialization, there's a lot of value out of learning, not to run in traffic. Is there not a lot of value to learn on a given day? Or, with the context comes in more so than the objective of the pain. It's how we react to that. If we do conform to that from there, are we settling? So as we move through life from that, people that, it's getting to where I was talking about people that might see shadow or how they might, once they do hear about it, as you're saying, those are the kinds of things, the little ways that you encounter those little things, it sounds like, and how maybe it didn't really go the way that you somehow remember it. Maybe in your conscious, or, you think about the sheer volume of experience that we have, from the physicality through the audible sounds. I mean, we look at each other, but we're seeing so much else. Our mind is really getting so much information.
Yes.
And in that, we can't really know how we're taking any of those things. And that would be the stuff that gets sort of tossed in that bag.
Yes. And, the things that get tossed in that bag are not just our negative aspects, but oftentimes there can be positive aspects that are reviled by the family. For instance, someone who is an extrovert. So I grew up being an extrovert. And, one of the things that I've become very fascinated by in some neuroscientific studies is that introversion and extroversion is actually a hardwired feature. It's literally a physiological preference for one neurotransmitter over another, dopamine versus acetylcholine. And, so there's a lot of information around that, PET studies and brain scans. It's really fascinating. But as an extrovert, right, I grew up in a family in which you don't talk until you're spoken to. And because I am an extrovert and I learn and process by talking about things, I was often labeled in my family as motor mouth, and I got in trouble at school for talks too much in class. And so, but being an extrovert is not necessarily a negative trait, but it is something that I shoved into my bag a long time ago. And then as an adult, I come into the field that I'm in now. And the first thing I started doing was training. But all this skill and training and my extroversion was in my bag. So I had to find it, pull it out, refine it, work with it, shadow work.
So that would have been buried by lack of use or engagement with it. In other words, if you exercise that action that you can, if you make that choice, then familiarity and trial and error over time, you get better at it, and you're just in that space, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Even though you can play a guitar, doesn't mean if you don't play it for 10 years, you're going to pick it up and be able to play. You'll be able to play it again. You have before, but probably not right now, but that would be a learned thing at that level. I would imagine, because, you mentioned that thing there, the introvert, extrovert, when you come down to the neuroscience of the transmitters that you're speaking of, when you get to that level, now you're connecting though, the mind-body connection in a real way, because now you allow for the action of, okay, well, if you've got these shadow parts going over here, what else could be going on in here? And so then if you live a life of constant drag over whatever it is, or overextending those areas of being your extrovert to where you're told, like you, that you have a motor mouth, or like me, I'm told I have a gift of gab. I love that. Mm-hmm. So with that in place, it's how much you do that. Just because you can speak, does that mean you don't stop? And this is probably the time when I'm telling myself I need to stop. But you see what I'm saying? It's pretty complex right there, how deep you want to go. But do most people, not most, but typically, how you approach those? Is there mind-body connection, the whole 9 yards in that when you do it?
Oftentimes being present. So because being present is the first way to become consciously aware of what's happening. And so, I'll do presence exercises in a coaching engagement, or sometimes just, in a personal environment. I say, well, let's take a breath. Let's take a breath right now. And let's notice if there are any parts of our body that are calling for attention. And what that does is that shuts the monkey mind down and brings the mind into the body. And it becomes embodied, and it searches the body for, is there a signal? Where's the signal? Oh, I'm feeling a little tension in my neck. Oh, okay. So now you're present because you're noticing whatever bodily sensations are happening. So becoming present is really an important first step, because then you can go into what narratives are playing in the background right now. And so it's not about what happened before. It's not about what's going to happen in the future. It's never been about that, right? Shadow work is about what's happening right now. What's coming up for you right now? So being embodied in the present moment and having a mind-body connection is hugely important to that.
So how much in shadow work do they get to the notion of accountability when it comes to those things? Because, I said at the beginning, the victim thing, that's obviously an issue with the victim mentality is accountability. Assigning blame to others for your life's problems. The world's out to get you. I can't be blamed. Mercury was in retrograde. Wasn't me. That's a playful one for all of our people in our communities, but still, everything like that we say, I can't go outside because of training. No, you can go outside. It's you choosing not to go outside because you don't want to get wet or something else, but say what it is, what you don't want to do, not what you can't do.
Right.
And so accountability, though, when you get into shadow work, you're also dealing with repressed memories. That can be a pretty volatile mix.
It can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a careful treading. And a lot of times it's that volatile. If something is volatile, it takes a while to come up. There's many, many layers of shadow, and it's easier to go into some of the more palatable aspects of shadow. So when people say, okay, so how do I know that I've got shadow work to do? There are a couple of very, very obvious markers. If you are blaming someone for something, right, you are projecting an aspect of your shadow. If you are judging for someone for something, you are projecting an aspect of your shadow. Anything that you account for externally and that you are not in a co-creative relationship with and manifesting your reality is an aspect of shadow projection. If an aspect or quality in someone is causes you to feel discomfort, whether it's irritation or loathing or whatever, any of those negative reactions that you have, or even positive reactions, because people can project a hero complex. And so people will project hero complexes, and now they have these sports icons, and people have, hero projections when they're projecting part of their own shadow. They just don't want to be accountable or responsible to the hero that is in them. And this is an aspect of divinity that has been rejected. So
go a little deeper into that. We hear a lot about victim. Typically when we hear about anything involving the mental space, you could say, psychiatric space, these, however you want to say it, it's, landmines with the way some people call those things. Let's look. We hear a lot about the victim, but the hero, we don't hear a lot about the hero. Now, of course, you're going to see a master class or something on the hero's tale and all this stuff. We all know that. But in this work, how does it express itself? Or how not, and I don't mean from the person, but I mean, how does it appear in shadow work?
Well, I mean, an easy way to identify that in coaching is to say, and a lot of people, when they're trying to emulate behaviors, let's say someone's trying not to be nervous about presentation. A lot of people are, scared to death, right? As one of the greatest fears of adults is presenting to a group. And so they're trying to overcome the presentation, the fears of speaking in a group, right? And so they'll come to coaching and say, I'm trying to learn better storytelling. I'm trying to learn not to be so nervous. I freeze up when I get questions I don't know answers to. How can you help me as a coach? And that's generally how the conversation will start. And then it leads into, so can you think of someone that presents really well? What kinds of behaviors would you like to emulate? And automatically, if they have someone that comes up relatively quickly, what you've got is a projection of some of the things that are in them they're atrophied because they've been in the shadow, but they recognize them because they're being mirrored back to them. So that's the other thing is when we are looking for our shadow, if we're looking at qualities that either irritate us or that enamor us, that's a mirror of something that is being projected from ourselves, being reflected back to us.
So I once heard it said along the lines of, when we see something in somebody else and it makes us, feel displeasure, that it is either something in them that we wish we had or something in us that we see in them. And that's pretty damning, really. You think about it like that, because that means, every person I admire, I'm secretly saying, man, I would just like them, or whatever, in an almost context that it makes it sound like something you shouldn't be doing. But definitely the second one, and so when it comes to accountability, the world is in front of you, your own personal created reality, we could say. It's tough to get people to stand up to the plate and look at the entirety of their life and accept accountability for even that jerk, even that whatever, that somehow that's, and not to beat yourself up thinking, oh, I'm just awful, but it's showing you something.
It is. And that's what it is. That's what it is. People who are reflecting these things back to us that create discomfort, they're our teachers. They have something to teach us about ourselves. The thing about a shadow is it's in our blind spot. And you'll never see your blind spot until someone external to you points it out to you. So really, we can show gratitude for having it been revealed to us, regardless of the cognitive dissonance that it creates initially. And it will. And so when you experience that whole, I call it scratchiness, somebody makes you feel scratchy. The person right now that is on the world stage making so many people in my world feel scratchy is President Trump. People are projecting their inner tyrant on him. There are people projecting their inner hero on him. It's either a love-hate relationship. And you don't see a lot of people who are neutral about him and seeing just the man. He's just a man doing a job. he's doing it his way because he's manifesting his reality. And yet, if we step out of either one of those projections and just see him as the man doing his job as the president of the United States and adding no value to his behaviors, no judgments, then we're just observers, right?
Mhm.
And then we're also not being in projection. We've become at oneness with whatever may have been triggering us. So many of my friends are like, oh, he's such a terrible character. He does this and he does that and he points all of this out. And all I do is listen. Because it's interesting how much of their own shadow they're sharing with me when they're describing someone who just scratches them the wrong way.
I wonder, I mean, it's getting a little on a limb, but when you talk about collective consciousness and energies that okay, anything I mean here is not the entirety of what somebody might think is collective consciousness. We're not talking species level or anything, but just if you want to talk about this sort of conscious engagement of two people to where they are collective in this sort of conscious space, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If one sees in the other that which they wish they had, or that which they see in themselves, they see in them that part of themselves they don't like, secretly though, they're not really aware of it like that. They're actually like that in some way, but they don't like this guy for doing it or this woman for doing it. That's the feel there. If that's the case, and I'm playing with it here.
Mm-hmm.
Flip side of that, I mean, in other words, you'd think that it would justify somehow as far as the equal weight of the interaction, as far as what is being sent and received here. But that doesn't seem like it would probably be the case, because if I'm pissed off at some guy that I think's a jerk, for all I know, he might think I'm a wonderful person and really wish he was my friend. And obviously, what's going on with those? I mean, Carl Jung would have a field day with that one, as far as what kind of archetypal things are coming through here. But but it's interesting, and really that's when you overthink it, when you start doing like I did there. But I guess overthinking these things in general is what you need to do to dig down and get deep and wrap your head around it whatever way you can, play with it.
Contemplative practice, yes. And so when someone reveals something to us, I'll give you an example of my own personal experience. Last fall, last summer into early fall, I experienced a dorsal vagal response, which was literally a sympathetic shutdown in my body. And it forced me to go introspective. I mean, it was my bodily response forced me to go introspective. And I was trying to figure out what's happening to me, what's happening. And I was coming up against an outdated belief system. And because I wasn't prepared to look at it in the moment when it started, there was this cascade of events that happened with my mental over contemplation, and then my body, the parasympathetic, the sympathetic response kicked in. And then after too much chronic experience with this sympathetic response, the fight or flight, I had a dorsal vagal response, which is when your body goes into freeze or shutdown. It's literally just like when people, they just kind of withdraw, that whole withdrawal. When you notice when people stop talking, they just withdraw. That's a dorsal vagal response. That's when the body is saying, you need to shut down for survival right now. And I was in that mode. And I had a hard time popping myself out of it. And I'd never had that problem before. So I struggled with it. I even went to a therapist and was like, I don't know what's happening. And so we unpacked some things. And and then plus my own work started to meld with, because what I needed was a blind spot to be revealed. I literally couldn't figure it out until I went to someone who was able to share with me a blind spot. And then once that blind spot was revealed, I was able to take over from there. I was only in therapy for like 3 months.
So to address the blind spot, was it by taking different approaches to looking at it, so to speak? And I don't want you, I'm not asking you to get personal on your own thing, but I mean, just in general on that process there, if somebody helps you see a blind spot that, I mean, obviously they don't have a big flashlight and say, look, maybe they do, I don't know.
Well, I liken it to this, and I like to use metaphor to talk about the subconscious and, how it communicates with us. If you're standing looking at a light source, your blind spot is behind you. And when we're driving, we use mirrors because our blind spot is behind us. So mirrors are the ways to see our blind spot. But if someone says, hey, look behind you, and you turn your back on the light and you see full-fledged in front of you your shadow, and you see it as an extension of yourself, now you have something to work with if you sit down and contemplative practice. And so now you have to go into your own self-coaching, right? And you have to ask yourself, what does this mean to me? Why is this important right now? And that's the contemplative practice where you start to go in and do that introspection and learn and understand. And then what you're doing is you're giving shadow its turn to have a noble and dignified presence in your conscious awareness. And then now you can unpack what it's trying to tell you. And what I learned was, because at that particular point, I had a fear program running about, well, it was about narcissism. I started to see narcissists everywhere. And then I was like, oh my God, what I know about the shadow work is that if I'm seeing narcissistic behaviors everywhere and narcissists everywhere, that means that I'm projecting. And then I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, I'm a narcissist. No, I'm not. And I was so resistant. And then I was like, sit down. You have to pay attention to what's happening to you right now. You're having such a resistant reaction to even considering that you might have be a narcissist. And the fact of the matter was, when I unpacked it, is I am not at my core a narcissist. I learned narcissistic behaviors in my familial conditioning. So yes, it exists in me because I was taught the behaviors, but it doesn't make me one. And when I finally came to that, me and my shadow came to a moment of gratitude and oneness in that understanding. And that's what can happen with other people.
Right. Well, to some degree, we're raised to be narcissists. You know, we want the other team's fans to feel like they're rooting for a bunch of idiots.
Yes.
You know, we want the other we want the other political parties' people to feel like their leader is a jerk and he's awful for whatever reason. We want all those things. We're trained to do that. And during the social conditioning phase of our lives, that's how you do it. You get over on people. It's the American way. You could say, I'm not trying to throw American under the bus, but look in the mirror. You know, and so yeah, it's interesting to see how these things get unpacked. So in a very macro way of looking at mental health for a second, when we talk about the midlife crisis, I in the past have likened it to roughly the first 18 years and then the second 18 years, and those don't match up. This sort of created world and then you experienced world. By the time you get here, it's the foundations are so effed up because you've changed so many things, you need to re-put it back together. And so, granted, that's not the case with everybody, but it works well with sort of looking at why it happens at around the same age group, which is roughly double the size of social conditioning phase. But at that time, what the person is presented with is the option to look back over all they've done, if they can dig back in that stuff, and really create a reality going forward where they have that stuff resolved. But you know, I just don't know how much we even know about, or how much it's even for the spiritual ones of us, having grown up in a society that's cutthroat. And I'm not trying to throw the United States under the bus. We're not evil people, but our society is brutal. And so it's a real challenge to not only engage this work, but to be honest enough about it to make it effective. Is that?
Yes. And I like that you brought up the American shadow, because collective shadows, I mean, even Jung indicated that there is a collective shadow, a collective subconscious. And so as we do our shadow work, we also alleviate the shadow work of the collectives which we belong to. So there's a shadow for the town of Athens, but you know, the town of Athens actually has two counterplays. I mean, if you look at it, we've got the bulldogs, and this is a productive form of working with the aggression shadow, right? And then we have Mathfest, which are the musicians, and a creative form of dealing with the maudlin aspects of living, right? So we have two very healthy counterbalances. So the Athens shadow is actually working with itself and has productive means of outlet for that shadow play.
And you know what's funny? Right there, as a resident of this area, you also note, by and large, not saying everybody, but the spiritual community looks at game day like, oh my gosh, what are all these rednecks doing in town? And the other ones are like my God, is that woman ever going to shave her armpits? You know, and so it's like, I mean, they are just as, just as polarized as anything else.
Yeah,
And
they're
of course,
pitted
they
against
both
each
think
other.
the other, whether they're saying it out loud or not, most likely the ones on the Bulldog side are saying it out loud and being funny about it in their way. But they're all secretly doing it to some degree. You know, and of course we do that in every choice we make. When we say no, inherently we're backing away from something, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. We're making the fittest decisions, hopefully.
Well, it's interesting that you say no and wrong, because these are positional aspects that create shadow, they create opportunities for shadow integration in the first place, because polarization is separation from self, which is what shadow is we are separate. We have separated from our shadow. And as we begin that reintegration process, because separation from shadow is a disintegrated personality. And so remembering that aspect, remembering our shadow, bringing it back into oneness with us and starting to work with it and work through it takes courage. Now we've popped up into the higher level of consciousness and the map of consciousness, which we don't have to go there, but it's one of the things I like to think about is shadow work takes courage. And so popping yourself into a place of courage and out of a polarized perspective, which if you think about it, a polarized perspective is positional. Left, right, wrong, heaven, hell, east, west. It's only two options, which is 2D, what I call 2D thinking. We live in a 3D reality. So where's our third option? And so what I like to refer to as the occultic third, when people become super polarized in their positioning, is to say, well, we're occultic meaning hidden. Where's the occultic third? So if you have yes, no, you've got maybe, or why can't it be both? I'm famous for saying, why can't it be both?
Go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I would like to know what your thoughts are on the whole polarization conversation.
If you want to know what my thoughts are, we'll also jump out of just this aspect of it. As you know, my foundational view of the universe is that there's no such thing as opposites, and that there's only levels of. You don't add darkness to light, you have less light. You don't add not water to water, you just have less water. And so in this, there is a fittest and all the other decisions. The fittest being the one that makes the most sense in this moment to propel me to the next moment. It might not be a nice decision, but it's the necessary decision. It's the fittest decision. That's where we get survival of the fittest. If we don't, it's all the rest of those. They're not wrong. They're just not the fittest.
That's a nice way to put it.
But in our subjectivity, we don't have that, because we have so millions of different questions all the time. So then we have two things. We have law and we have religion, which are basically the same thing. One just says it's controlling you in a different way. And so within that, then you get the abstract things called morality, which are perceived as solid, but move with generations vis-a-vis the current political climate of the United States, dominated by a political party that both champions death and tries to save it at the same time. And so that's a morality question, wouldn't you say? So that means it's subjective to who we're talking about. If we're talking about the abortion doctor, blow his ass up. If we're talking about blow his ass up. But if we're talking to save the baby, over here, somebody does something wrong, like say blow somebody up, you kill them. You put them in the electric chair, whatever it is they do these days. So that's interesting. That's a shadow part of the American consciousness, because here we all are wide awake in America, yet this goes on. And even the ones that support both are not being aligned with themselves on that level, though they say they are, through this abstract morality that on one side is attached to a legal system and on the other attached to a religious value. So yes, subjectivity is a mess.
And what would happen if somebody sat in contemplative
That's why nature
practice?
and so in that, nature has no opinions. The shark is not mad at you. The universe is not out to get you. The universe doesn't give a crap about these things around us. We are the only ones that care about us like that. Right. We're all necessary components making the fittest decisions to emerge and fill the universe as we do. That's how I would look at that.
Yeah, and we ascribe value to our experiences. And so sometimes our experiences are ascribed value based on our personal narratives, and our narratives stem from our belief system. So if we
Right.
believe that the universe is out to get us, then it always is. It
Well, it becomes, but see, that's how we create our reality. We
exactly.
manifest that thought. I mean, this is another conversation, but these sort of like psychological algorithms that get placed out there in space that have been manifest now in thought, we manifest all of this stuff. You know, if we're getting into the other conversations I have where everything, our reality is created by us, in that we develop our way to go through it and what makes sense to us. So we remember these little pieces and parts of ways that we're successful, and that becomes our story, our way, as I think Jung, this is where he comes into the archetypes, that there's millions of them and they express themselves in each individual differently, depending on their subjective consciousness based on their own life experiences, everything from actually touching things to being told things or feeling things.
Right. And the narratives are important to understand how we become programmed, but also how we program ourselves. Because if you think about words, right, and wordplay, and one of the mantras I live by is word choice matters. And it does, in my opinion, come down to semantics, how we create and manifest our reality. So when you're talking about archetypes, if we assume, and from my perspective, I assume this, that we embody both a sacred feminine and a divine masculine, a dark feminine and a tyrannical or patriarchal masculine. That's 4 aspects of self in one body, right? And oftentimes it's the darker archetypes, those are archetypes, right, that we shove into the bag. But if you look at what's happening currently, right, you see a lot of this pushback against the patriarchy. And so that's a lot of projection of that dark masculine that's coming into the forefront right now. And so what's happening now is we're working with that shadow aspect, and how well we're working with it is up for debate, but it's being presented. The other thing that I'm seeing is there is a huge movement in the pagan and witchy aspects, which is, if you think about it, the witch is the dark feminine aspect, but people are bringing this part out and learning to play with that in productive ways and to embody and incorporate that darker feminine in a way that involves ceremony or spell casting, but understanding that words and the words that we use to program our thinking matter. So if you're talking to someone who identifies as a witch, they will say, well, be careful of the spells that you cast. So if you're like cursing someone, right, on the road because they cut you off, that's cursing, and cursing carries with it a karmic load. And that goes into a whole nother conversation. But
Yes.
the thing is too, is that we manifest our reality by saying, an empath may say to someone who is experiencing a lot of negative emotional experiences, that are having an emotional drain on the body, and they say, oh, I feel you, I really feel you. And then for the next week, they might just be like, oh, it just feels so awful, and Mercury retrograde and all of that, and pushing it all out there and saying, this isn't me. But when you say, I feel you, you're literally telling your mind and your body to open its energetic centers to experience someone else's experience. And then now you're taking that on as your own, when perhaps maybe it's not.
That's the problem that empaths run into. When you see empaths saying that the world, you see something along the lines of, there's so much energy in the world right now, I just can't stand it. Or I've sat with so many people that have this problem and that thing, it's driving me crazy. That would be, that's not self-care. That is,
it's not. Yeah.
That's in other words, and I think we talked about this briefly for anybody. I'll elaborate. The empathic style of so say I'm an empathic person, I can connect to other people in whatever way you want to say that. And so I do that. And so the person tells me about their problem. And so I imagine myself in that problem. What would I do if I were in that situation? And then if it's open for that, I share that. If not, I shut up, whatever. But in other words, you don't barge in like that. But what I do at the end of that, though, when it's over, I release it from me, because it was not my pain to begin with, and I don't have any pain. The problem is I've seen folks get so into the pain of the other and they feel it like them. I was like, feel how you are. I know how you are. I know. And so this language is we're putting ourselves in their body. And then when it's over, we take that with us. And so the pain that was not ours to start with now is. And then we, again, say the world did that to us.
Right.
And, I'm not trying to be hard on any empaths out there that may be in that situation, but, maybe consider that. I don't know. Yeah, because that's a landmine right there. I mean, you're a sponge if you're a shadow sponge, and here it is all day long coming in. I mean, you gotta keep your light on. You gotta realize I'm in the dark, but I still have my light. It's just right here.
Right.
It's just I'm just pretending.
Right.
And not just put your light out, jump into the darkness or whatever you want to call it, shadow, and then lose your way.
Well, you know what I think is interesting is we're in the middle of this global shutdown, right? Because of, can I say it? Would it shut down your YouTube channel? Because of coronavirus, right? And so to be socially responsible.
I don't think anybody's heard the mention of the coronavirus yet. So if you know anything more, please tell us. I'm kidding.
Well, and speaking of wordplay, let's break this term down. Corona. What is a corona?
Well, if you rearrange the letters, it spells raccoon. It does. And they wash their hands.
Okay.
Your turn.
Well, a corona, right? If we think about a celestial body that is displaying a corona, it's basically a halo around this celestial body. And then what is a virus?
Yeah.
It's an infectious agent that can poison the body, mind, or soul. So in this phrase, coronavirus, we have two very oppositional, it's a paradox, right? We've got this halo around a celestial body and an infectious agent that poisons the mind, spirit, body, or has the potential to do that, right? And so, now we've got this global shadow that's presented itself. I mean, it's loomed up, like it's basically said, and this is the way I look at it. It's basically said, you have ignored me long enough. I am going to force a dorsal vagal response on the collective psyche of the world. I'm going to make everybody shut down, and you need to sit down and think about this. I'm going to make sure that the world shuts down so that you have enough leisure time to do some contemplative practice about what is happening. Because, and disconnection, you need to do some introspection. So I'm going to force some disconnection, social distance. I mean, it's just kind of interesting how this whole thing has played out. And for me, this is how I'm translating it. And so it's an interesting contemplative practice, because for me, as I do my own shadow work and contribute to helping other people doing their shadow work, we are contributing to the integration of the collective and global shadows and the psyche enrichment from those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like the connection to the global thing, because in the first week of this, back in it was the first week of March, I got a little flack for saying that this wasn't, because at the time the question was, why are the older people getting it so fast and the younger people, and nobody under 20 or whatever in those days even had it. And so this sort of unspoken, like the elderly natural selection thing somehow entered my field. And so I said that, but I didn't see it like that. I saw this as a great time of the earth sort of forcing the issue on us, like that. Well, how we perceive cancer is how now the globe is considering coronavirus, sort of. And this is a manifestation of our own system falling apart, similar to that. And so I called it, I said, it's not natural selection, it's natural correction. And of course, that didn't sit well with people that, grandma or mom or they themselves are over, whatever the age group was. And I can see that. I get it. But I do agree that there's a lot to be said for the notion of these higher views of what's going on right now. And, nobody else can really prove it wrong, and right now they're struggling to prove anything right,
Right.
So,
right. It's creating mass confusion.
But yeah, we're being faced with our fears. We're being faced with sitting at home the people that are saying that they're bored at home, well, what is not entertaining about your life? What something when you say you're bored, you're also saying something's not entertaining me. Why do you need to be entertained? Can you entertain yourself? You remember how to do that? That part way back buried in that shadow was your ability before maybe you buried it down there in your, living up to the expectations of others, stuff like that.
Well, what's interesting about that is that child that person who as a child may have grown up in, let's say, my cousin was just sharing this with me recently, may have grown up in a home as a single child and been expected to act like an adult throughout their childhood. So never had a lot of expressions for play or outlets for play. So maybe they don't actually know how to play. The way to engage that shadow of boredom is to say, what kind of adult play am I interested in? What would be something novel, new, and different that might help me discover something new about myself?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's interesting to see how things like that, if you've never experienced them. Personally, my own, as a child, I moved a lot, and I was one of these kids that was, trouble in school and all this really chronically. And I remember at one point a couple of years ago, and I've been in love, so to speak, but that's the point. I didn't know if I ever really had been. I couldn't honestly say that I fully was, even though maybe I had said it at the time and maybe stayed in that space for a couple of years. But to me, there was something missing from that space. It goes along the lines of unconditional. If it was unconditional, then it still is, because otherwise conditions have changed.
Right.
So it wasn't unconditional. But that
Exactly.
sucks. Now, there are instances that's not the case. I mean, somebody can pass away, in prison, any number of things can happen to literally take them out of your life like that. But a lot of that's in the way we phrase it to ourselves and how we pack it away in that bag.
Right. Right. And understand. I think unconditional love, practicing that, even just taking moments to say, okay, I'm going to sit in contemplative practice, maybe do meditation or some kind of pagan ritual or whatever, where you connect in oneness with, the earth. Like one of my favorite practices is to create a ritualized ceremony and experience oneness with this planet and a deep connection with her as a celestial being of great wisdom and a font of all of the motherly aspects that I still need in my life. And in experiencing that oneness, I am often prompted to remind myself that she has many, many children on this planet, not just me, and they're all my brothers and sisters. If she's our mother, then we are all siblings. And how can I learn to open my heart or heart chakra up and love them all? And so it's not something I can do every day. It's a very difficult practice to engage in on a constant basis, but engaging in it purposefully for as many moments as you can is one way to experience that oneness, so to be unconditionally loving. It's very difficult, and we have a lot of factors get pitted against us to prevent us from being that way all the time. But it doesn't prevent us from engaging in the practice and at least understanding it and feeling it in moments when we choose to.
It's funny though when you say that. The obviously far and away the most important is self-love, is loving yourself fully before you can love another, obviously. But within that, I lost my train of thought. But I do this from time to time. This is a
Well,
result.
I can expound on that, and it might remind you where you were going.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I like to talk to people about is, and this comes from the raw material, or the law of one, is we can choose between service to self or service to others, right? And
Right.
service to self in service to ego, right, is the selfish path, and service to others, in an altruistic sense, is the left hand path, or in service to source, whatever you want to call it. But then there is a third way, and I call it service to self as a means of service to others. In other words, when we do our shadow work and when we take care of ourselves in self-care, we take care of our mental state, we take care of our physical body, and we take care of our spiritual state. When we take care of our house and the many mansions in our own house, then we are able to be of service to others without experiencing martyrdom, which is another shadow projection. And so there is service to self as a form of service to others.
Yeah, and see, a lot of that self-love could be corrupted into a form of forcing yourself on others. In other words, even if you do have a victim mentality of the world, no good for me, and I have a poor self-image, and I'm not good enough, you have the whole laundry list of all those things, you still defend your spot. You will not change. You need to defend that part that's not even owning up in a weird way. In other words, that would be a person that just will not see the folly of their ways because they simply have created so much of an illusion of their story in front of them that encompasses all of their reality. And really, at that point, you get into the etheric brain. You know, you think about it. If somebody has not developed their etheric brain and they cannot literally connect to energies above a certain level, they're going to really, well, for starters, they simply can't see certain things. It's just simply not possible. And so getting them there would be hard because these are the kind of people that say that happy people live in la la land, as if la la land is some kind of thing that is crazy. What I think la la land is the ability to see the world and get over it and move through it, and you're just in a comfortable space no matter what the hell's going on. And other people say you live in la la land. Well, la la land looks just like your world. It's just not as complicated and busy, and I don't let it bother me the same way. Problem is, your version of this same land does not look like it at all. So to you, it is la la land.
Right. Well, and that's
it.
another thing is I think the spiritual community, especially new age communities, are all about this positive focus. And that was one of the areas where I struggled with regards to shadow work, was that it was positive focus to the exclusion of anything negative. And so if you were experiencing something negative, spiritual bypassing.
That's spiritual bypassing right there, or some form of it anyway. When you only focus on, it's the same as doing the opposite, always beating yourself up, looking at all your failures,
right.
That quick personal story on shadow work and something from my past. The one and only ever, when I was still drinking 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now. Well, this is probably around 10 years ago. I had decided to go and see what one of these meetings would be like. So I went to one, and I'm not going to say what it was, but so I was there. And when I stood up, after listening to everybody talk about how they had missed all the opportunities in their life and how this thing had caused so much pain in their life and all these things, it had caused so much pain and they had missed opportunities. And at the time, I was very successful in my work, as you know, from my past as being a sports person. I was still in that space. And I had executed every opportunity I ever had. And I got up to introduce myself, and they said I had to introduce myself as a certain label, to which I would not do. And then I just said, I looked around the room and said, I've got nothing in common with any of you people, and I left. Because I wasn't going to get trapped in a room full of people that blamed the world for their problems. And all they did was sit around and talk about how bad they had acted with their decision-making process going forward and get locked in the belief that they could only make bad decisions. And besides that, they were screwed because of this other thing above them that would control them regardless. And I thought, that's not a place for me to be. And thank goodness it wasn't. I only went there half out of interest, but that's a problematic mindset to get in when you beat yourself up and then live in a label. You've got yourself in an illusion that you can't get out of, because now, next thing you know, you start attaching God to it. He puts you there, and oh my gosh, here we go.
Well, let's talk about that, right? So my mother's a Catholic. I was raised Catholic, have since, disconnected from that religion, but you're born a sinner. That's the label. And the only way you can get salvation is by accepting that Christ is your savior. And so one, you're identifying with, you can do no right, right? That's what a sinner is you can do no right. You're fucked.
Yeah.
And
And by
then,
the way, your
and
creator
then,
makes defective products. Go ahead.
and then now you have to externalize salvation, right? And so you've given up responsibility for your own ability to save yourself. And now you're looking for a rescue. So this is a victim mentality
You're
program.
born a victim. You're already a victim of your own future not doing the right thing because you've already sinned, and you're going to again, and you're
Yeah,
going
you're
to get
going to
punished
again.
for it. And you're
Right.
going to get punished by your angry God. That's why that's referred to as an angry God, which I'm sure is stinging maybe somebody out there, but who else throws you in a room full of fire if you do the wrong thing? I mean,
Well,
sounds
let's
like he's
take that
pissed.
one step further, right? So my house had crucifixes all over it. And here is an iconic, in your face, right? Static depiction of gross violence, a dead and tortured God on a cross, that we're taught as kids to see the glory and not the gory of God, right? In this dead and tortured man who is a God who rose 3 days later. I was having a conversation with one of my friends at work about, he says, so it's interesting because, what do you call it when you raise a dead person from the dead outside of the Bible? Necromancy.
Well,
and I was like,
we don't want to
there's
steer
a
this.
lot of Christians that aren't going to like that. And he said, but isn't that true? If you're practicing raising people from the dead, that's necromancy. And
We're going to have another conversation about this. We need to get back to shadow work. We're going down the religion aisle now, and we could go.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because this is.
I brought it up. Right, I introduced it. I admit.
Darkness right in our face all the time, and yet,
yeah, it is.
How do the Christians use it to balance? So they're projecting their darkness into this.
Right, like I drive by a sign and it says, I live by a church and they have a little sign out front. They change it every few days, and recently it said, "Jesus forgives me." Okay. I mean, I get it. I get it. I'm not trying to step on the religion's toes there, but why is the God already saying the mistake you're about to make is okay? What? I mean, Jesus forgives you ahead of time, past? I mean, it's just, to me, it puts society in we're talking about that moving morality earlier. That's exactly how that happens. You're going to make the wrong decision, and how we're going to give you 2 ways to answer the same question, and it's going to be about life. It's not going to complicate things at all, so have fun with that. Watch what you put in your bag.
Right.
It's sharp.
Yeah. And if you really want to carry around pretty baggage, go buy yourself a set of Louis Vuitton. I used to tell people that I've got Louis Vuitton baggage for days, and that was my way of joking around that I was carrying around a lot of baggage, but I was. And if we admit that we have stuff that we can work on, and if as it comes up, as it's being mirrored to us, or as we're noticing projections, we may not necessarily need somebody to tell us, hey, I'm kind of noticing this pattern of behavior that seems pretty cyclical for you, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that. Because what people need is a non-judgmental space to experience something about themselves that hasn't been in their conscious awareness prior. And when they can enter that space, a lack of judgment space, a non-blaming, a non-shaming space, they may be open in those moments to tuning in their tuner to receive a message they were not previously able to receive. And that's the hope in shadow work, by the way, because what is the purpose of shadow work? Well, the purpose of shadow work is to free yourself from programming, to free yourself from triggers. The thing is once you work on your triggers, you can never be triggered by them again. It is a true liberation. What used to trigger you in the past can never be used against you in the future once you work with it. It is a true liberation.
That would be it.
Plus, you experience a oneness. You start to experience a oneness. You start to develop a sense of compassion, because when you've done your work, you see other people struggling, you see their struggle, and you're like, I've been there. I know how that feels. We're all just humans. We're all trying to have perfect lives against these measures that are impossible to measure up against. And we are our own worst enemy.
Yeah, and to speak to the value of shadow work, though I didn't do it specific like this, when I was doing drug and alcohol counseling as a counselor, um, it was more a philosophical approach and not based on the DSM-5 and the standards as much. I mean, obviously it was clinical, so it counted, but in that I found, and so far as I know, I don't know that I had any person that stopped doing what they were doing that went back, and most of them, a lot of them still stay in touch with me. But what happens there is that we would, through this sort of philosophical trip through esoteric ways and science, all kinds of things, um, shed different kind of light on some areas. And what happened was the effect of it, which was the drinking or the arguing or whatever, it was never that thing, but they treated the effect. But in this other way of sort of going to this shadowy area, you could say, this subconscious back further and asking questions that they didn't typically get asked, something would happen there. And it was as if, picture an upside down Christmas tree and the star shattering and the whole thing just vanishes. Like all of those problem behaviors from it, you didn't have to address each one. The foundation was gone, thus the growth from it was no longer um, I don't even know the absolute word here, but it was no longer possible.
Right.
Because it couldn't emerge from that space. That space is where it was coming from. So that conversation that we had about when you were 9, that you'd never talked about like that before, and suddenly you've gone 10 days without even thinking of the fact that you're in recovery and from alcohol, and then next thing you know, it's just like that. Because it doesn't come back. You don't get the cravings because those cravings are caused by these things still being present. The effect is gone, but the problem is still this part. The shadow is still doing whatever it does.
That's a great way to put it. Yes, there are branches and branches within the shadow. And so if you get rid of a core branch, then there's a lot of branch work that you've just eliminated. Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it like a family tree. I mean, you take out one generation, that tree stops. I mean, you're not gonna have it come back. The effect of having more of your people, it's over. And a problem we have with those kind of spaces, instead of going into the shadow, we try to stay in the conscious world and treat the conscious effect and the conscious decisions being made, not understanding that the pieces and parts behind those reside down there. I see you have a cat.
Yes, Jimmy.
How's the cat doing with quarantine?
Oh, he's loving it because I'm home every day and he's like, I love my mom, as he jumps up and while I'm working at my laptop constantly. And then he likes to lay here while I'm working. So he loves it.
Okay. Well, maybe next time we'll do this, he could help us with the live stream. I have no idea what the beginning of this video is like. For all I know, we're sitting here talking about, I don't even know. We were on for a couple of minutes. So hopefully it wasn't going a long time. If so, you got us now. You got the goods on us. But Carrie, I appreciate this. I don't know how long we've been on. It feels like we've pretty much covered our stuff. But I would like to ask, or offer anyway, to come back and do this again and talk more about, you are the person that I've probably spoken more with about the Morrigan and some of the, I guess you could say, darker aspects of Nordic and Celtic stuff over the years, to include the Sather that we did. And many shamanic journeys and stuff like that we've done together. I wouldn't mind having you on again to talk about some of those kinds of things, because those kinds of things are just as valuable to us as any of these things in making our world better, you could say.
I agree. No, I'd love to. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on today. And thank you for being open to talking about shadow work. And there's lots of different rabbit holes to go down. I mean, we could certainly talk about different aspects of it for a while. I just hope, it is my sincere hope, that anyone who's watched this has become suddenly intrigued and would like to learn more. That's the first step. And so now you've got an extra channel on your receiver that when you tune in, you may be more open to the information that's coming through.
On that note, if somebody's watching would like to speak to you, how do they do that? How would they do that? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can visit my website, cosmiccoaching.org, and you can reach me that way. Yes. Yes,
You're at the office. Yeah.
that's right.
Great.
And
I
so,
love
sorry
it.
about that. He just can't, he's like, I'm just going to be in your face. So yeah, that's how they can reach me. I'm also on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and I don't have as much of a Facebook presence or an IG presence at the
I can
moment.
tell by the fact that you're like, oh, you're doing live. I was like, yeah, I think I've done 20 in the past 2 months, friend.
Yes.
Friend.
Well, I watch your YouTube channel. I'm more of a
Now
tuber.
you're YouTube. Well, this might be the way forward. We might not be doing Facebook Live like that anymore. Might
Mhm.
originate here and stay here because it's easier to stream it from or share it from here anyway.
Yeah.
But all right, well, I appreciate it, and thanks again.
Thank you. Well,
All
hey,
right.
Guru.
All right, that's it. Like and share, please, down below. Leave any comments wherever you're watching this. I'm gonna share it to a number of places, and of course, you can visit windandraven.com to find out more, including future conversations like this. Tomorrow there will be one Wednesday, and you can check the events page. It's going to be about the consciousness of a life on the road as a musician and what that's like. So
Sounds awesome.
that's all I got. Thanks again,
Great. Thank you,
Carrie.
Steve. Have a
All
great
right,
afternoon.
we're ending this, I think. Leave me.